So is a $600 aquarium LED that much better than one that you can pick up for like 80 or 100 bucks? We're gonna talk about that today, as well as a few different other things related to aquarium lighting, hopefully get you to throw away all of the useless information that I used to think was super important over the years, and then also help you to pick out what probably is the best light fixture for your tank, whether you have plants or not. And we need to first go back in time a little bit to find out why I'm even making this video in the first place. We set up this tank and we were running the Kessil light on it for the first few weeks. If you saw that video, you know what I'm talking about. You'll also know that the Kessil had a problem. It had this persistent flickering that happened a lot more when it was turned way up, but it was still happening even at lower levels. Not sure what the deal was, whether it was a problem with the unit itself or it had something to do with the fact that Friend has chewed the power cord on this several times. I've replaced it, I've mixed it around with other LEDs, and I think this is the original unit that's meant for it, but I could be wrong. Regardless of that, I knew I wanted to change the light on this tank. I had one of these fancy ONF lights that had a hanging kit and that I thought would look really good on this main show tank that I have down here. Only problem was, it's a 2-foot light, and I was concerned about whether or not it would provide enough light for this tank. I decided to go with this light anyway because I know it makes the tank look really nice, and because overall it's just a fancy fixture. It looks really good. So we started by pulling it off of the old tank. We had to unscrew the hanging kit and then get it over to the new tank. Because I'm not sure if we're gonna have something like a light screen on the back of this aquarium, I need to attach this hanging kit on the side of the aquarium. And at this point, I wasn't sure if we were gonna have enough clearance to even hang the light and get it centered over the middle of the tank. Turns out we were just fine. So overall, the tank looks really good with this light fixture on it, but I do realize that it's a pretty expensive unit. Just the light fixture without the hanging kit is like 380 bucks. The hanging kit is another $180. That puts us at like $560, $580, sorry for the bad math there. Add a little bit of tax on there if you have to pay tax, and you're pretty much around $600. And that's a lot of money for a light fixture. I'm not gonna pretend like it's not and that you have to have something like this, because you don't. If you have multiple tanks and you need to light 5, 6, 7 tanks, you're probably not gonna do it all with these. It's just not a realistic thing. So yeah, you're definitely paying for a really nice looking presentation of a light. The hanging kit, the sleekness of the light, it just looks really nice. I think the main question here though is this $600 light so much better than say like an $80, $100, $150 light that it's worth paying this much more money for it? And the answer to that is no, but also yes, it depends. If money is no object to you, you have a bunch of it and you want the best stuff, you can spend more than $600 for an awesome light. You can spend $1,000 and get an ADA RGB and be an all-star. I've never had one. I'm not cool enough to get that kind of stuff over here, but I mean, the sky's the limit as far as the amount of money you can spend. Do you need to? Probably not, but if you have the money and you want the best stuff, air quotes best, but also not air quotes, because it kind of is, then you can do that. So here's the deal. This LED makes this tank look really good. It makes it look better than pretty much any other standard default value or especially cheap LED that's on the market. The only way you're gonna be able to tell the difference is if you have them side by side. If you're just used to staring at this with this light, you're gonna think that that's normal. If you put any other LED or like a really cheap one on there for a long enough time, you're gonna think that that looks really good and normal too. That's another reason for why I decided to make this video, is because I had a couple light fixtures. I have a whole graveyard of them in the garage, and I got curious and started looking at it a little bit more closely. The only difference between a fancy light fixture and most of them in this super expensive category and all the other LEDs out there is that these lights tend to use WRGBs. A WRGB is a single LED diode that has basically all the colors of the rainbow in it. Essentially. I'm not an LED expert, but that's my understanding of it. What's more typical and pretty much consistent with all the other lights on the market is that they have an array of different LEDs. So you have whitish LEDs, you have green LEDs, blue LEDs, red LEDs. They're all separate and they're all on at different amounts and ratios to give you a color index in the tank. What the WRGBs seem to do is produce, at least to me, a more natural color index or rendering in the tank. I guess another way to say that is that it looks more real with this type of lighting. That's also weird to say though, because it's not like it's more or less real depending on what light you have on it, but I think you know what I'm trying to say. The only way to really show this is to show you some comparisons. So I took some pictures because I'm sure this camera isn't the best at rendering colors on its own, but I think my camera's a little bit better. So here we have a picture of the tank with the ONF LED that's on the tank right now. and you can see kind of what that looks like. Next to it, we have the Fluval 3.0. This is probably like the most popular light for the last few years. I'm sure millions of people have them. They're good at growing plants, but overall they're a pretty good light. And for a long time, they were in a good price point and they just made sense. And I think that's part of why most people have them. You can see the difference though. So the ONF light, the tans look more tan, the greens look more green. The Fluval light has a little bit more of a washed out feeling to it. Like it's almost like everything's just a little bit more yellowy. And this is something that you're not gonna notice if you have one or the other on the tank. But side by side like this, you can definitely tell that there's a difference. This is the same kind of phenomenon that you'd see if you had like a beamwork LED, something that has a lot more blues in it. You'd get a washed out, but more towards the blue end of the light spectrum. And again, it's not a huge deal if you're not looking at them side by side, which you're probably not going to be. I also don't think that there's gonna be a huge difference in their abilities to grow plants. Sure, some lights like the Fluval light have more PAR than the beamwork. You can look up blogs and you can see people that have independently tested the PAR values of a bunch of different light fixtures. I used to do that back in the day before I broke my PAR meter, but PAR isn't necessarily the be all end all. It's something that the light manufacturers jumped on the bandwagon of hyping up because consumers were getting more educated on photosynthetic active radiation. And so they wanted to include like, hey, we have the best PAR value on our light, we have more than these lights. But the deal with PAR is that just because you have a higher PAR value than another light fixture doesn't mean you're going to grow plants faster or better. Without getting too into it, photosynthetic active radiation is a spectrum. You have, the blues and the reds are more common, but you can get a high PAR rating if you have all green light. That falls in the spectrum. That's not going to be super great for plants because they want those blues and reds. You get what I'm saying? Most lights these days don't have a problem like that. You're not going to accidentally buy one that has a high PAR rating that's not in the blues and the reds primarily. It's really not something that I think anybody should be paying much attention to. Most lights have enough PAR to grow most plants, and I think it's just something that gets in the way and confuses people. Quick random cheese and cracker break. What about our friend Kelvin? What's he up to these days, and is he still relevant? Kelvin is the measure of color temperature, and for most Planet Aquarium LEDs out there, you're gonna be in a range that is just fine. I don't think it's something that you should actively worry about. 6500K is pretty much the default, and that's what a lot of lights out there are. That's what I have this one at, and it's also what the Fluval Plant LED is at standard. But something like the ADA fancy solar RGB light has a range from 8,000 to 12,000. I bet everybody that has that fixture runs it at 8 and not 12. But to be honest, most of the ranges that most LEDs are gonna be in are gonna be hard to really tell a difference unless you have them side by side. For example, Aquarium Co-op's new LED is standard at 57-ish hundred Kelvin, I believe. The Fluval 3.0 is again at 6500 before you make any changes via the app. And here they are side by side. You can definitely tell that the Aquarium Co-op LED is a little bit warmer than the Fluval light, and we would expect that because of the difference in the Kelvin rating. But at the end of the day, I don't think this is gonna matter at all when it comes to growing plants. It's really just gonna come down to your preference and what kind of colors you wanna highlight in your tank. As long as you don't accidentally purchase a light that's meant for marine and it has a Kelvin rating of like 14K, then I think you're gonna be just fine. So at the end of the day, if you're into this stuff, there's a lot of marketing that you have to kind of plow through to find out what's gonna work best. I think really what's gonna work best is just whatever fits your budget and works for you and your tank. I don't think your plants are gonna mind if the Kelvin rating or the PAR is a little bit different than this other light fixture that's way more expensive, and visually it might not make a huge difference. And if you don't have plants, you don't have to really worry about any of this stuff. But I will say that a fancy light fixture will still make your fish really pop and might look better compared to some of these other cheaper options. I did want to talk a little bit more about the Aquarium Co-op light though, because I think it's going to overtake Fluval's position in the market as far as being pretty much the most popular light out there. That's mainly based on the pricing. So the 4-foot model is going for about 150 bucks, whereas the Fluval 4-foot light is now going for $229. So that's a significant difference, and I think there's a lot of things about the Aquarium Co-op light that make it really good, especially for beginners. The fact that it doesn't have an app is kind of nice. I know a lot of people are tired of having a bunch of apps on your phone, but if you're one of those people that like that about the Fluval light, then stick with what you know. It has an easy to use built-in dimmer, so you can switch between 6 different brightnesses. The highest brightest setting is probably too bright for most people's tanks anyway. It's just a simple light with a really good construction. It doesn't get as hot as the Fluval plant LED, which I know a lot of people have had issues with in the past, myself included. It's more water resistant, so if you accidentally are fiddling with it and you dunk it in the tank, chances are it's gonna be a non-issue. And overall, it just seems to be a lot stronger, so if you are the kind of person like me that drops stuff and lugs things around for a long time, then it's probably gonna last a little bit longer for you too. But this video isn't meant to be an ad for that light in particular. I just wanted to highlight that as a really good option for somebody that's in the market for a new light, doesn't want to spend a ton of money. If you want to learn more about the Aquarium Co-op LED, there will be, of course, links down in the description in the comments. But if you happen to be watching on a TV, hit this QR code. It'll take you right to it. But at the end of the day, I'm still gonna pick this light over all the other ones, mainly because I know and have seen the difference for myself. I'm not gonna have these fancy WRGB or RGB LEDs on all my tanks, because that's really unrealistic. I can't afford to be spending hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars on multiple tanks, but I can for one or two. So on a display tank that I take a lot of pride in and that I put most of my time and energy into, I'm probably gonna select a light like this or something fancy because it has this really nice aesthetic look to it. And then also the color rendering in the tank, I think is more in line with what I'm trying to do and show you guys. Don't get hung up so much on Kelvin and par ratings and all of these other things that companies try and confuse you with. If it's meant to be a planted tank LED and it's marketed as one, then chances are it's gonna be just fine for growing plants. Even if it doesn't have a crazy super high par rating, it's still probably gonna work really good for you. But I think the vast majority of aquarium plants we're trying to grow don't need that much light. So it just adds to more algae if you're running it on full blast. If I had to build out sort of like a tier list for lights, it would obviously start with some of the really cheap stuff you can find on Amazon, like the Beamwork, the Night Crew, probably throw Higer into that. Then you're gonna move up into the, it's over $100, maybe closer to $100 or $200 for a light. So we're gonna put the Aquarium Co-op LED in there. We're gonna put the Fluval 3.0 plant LED in there. And you're also gonna have some of the lower tier twin star lights that are more marketed as aquascaping and plant LEDs. The twin star lights really confuse me because there's just a bunch of numbers and letters attached to the different levels of how expensive they are and how much better they might be. So you can find some lesser expensive twin star lights that I think look really good aesthetically and provide a good color index to the tank. They make stuff look really nice. Then you have sort of the higher tier twin stars. You're getting into the $200, $300, $400 range for those. And it's in that tier that we're gonna throw the ONF lights in there because they fit into that price range. Also in this range, there's a lot of lights. Some of the new Chiros lights, probably pronouncing that wrong, but you know what I'm talking about, are pretty good. They're RGB LEDs as well. I haven't gotten my hands on any of them yet, but I know a lot of people that have been using them and really like what they're providing to their tanks, so we're gonna throw those in there as well. And there's probably a bunch of other brands that I'm forgetting. I'm just going based off of a lot of what I have used in the past. And then of course up on top, we're gonna have the ADA Solar RGB because it's the cream of the crop. It's definitely the fanciest of all the fancy lights, constructed probably the best out of anything because that's just what ADA does with all their products. But yeah, it's gonna sit up top. It's gonna run you about $1,000. And I don't know if I'll ever have one. I hope maybe I can get one at a discount or something one day, but who knows. So anyway, guys, I hope that answered some questions you might have about lighting fixtures and LEDs and some of the other things involved in the process. And I hope I highlighted some good options for you. Now you have some better information to go tackle the job at hand, which might be buying a new light fixture. A bunch of the stuff we talked about will be linked down in the description so you can check some stuff out, support the channel that way, and it means a lot. Things are moving in the right direction. We got a bunch of new projects going on. Kind of did a little bit of a spoiler on the sweet potato. We're messing around with some new stuff. I'm excited. Thank you once again for watching, guys, and we'll see you in the next one.